All right, this is going to be a long format video on how to address a really common issue on pressure washers. They tend to only get used once, maybe twice a year, and so the fuel goes bad. This customer brought it to me. He'd already changed out the fuel. He'd already disassembled the carburetor, but he didn't know how far to take it. So he kind of took it down to the bowl, but he didn't get the jets out of here. So they're probably still gummed up. I'll just show you what it's doing. It's basically starting installing is what he said. And it basically wouldn't start at all unless you sprayed some carb spray in past the air filter um, through that hole. But he improved it enough so that it runs a little bit on its own. You want to be careful starting and running pressure washers for more than a second or two without water going through the pump. But for demonstration purposes, I'll show you real quick what it's doing. So ignition is on, choke is on. So it's basically a start and stall. And this engine, the Honda GCV 160, is a very common engine. This isn't a Honda pressure washer. This is a Black Max, whoever that is. But this is a common engine that's used in lawnmowers and pressure washers and all sorts of things. And so this may apply to you. So again, really common style. It can be easy to disassemble and difficult to assemble for a lot of people. So we're just gonna go through this step by step and start with a 10 millimeter. Zip out these studs. One of the dangers is that you're gonna pull these out and then later things are gonna kind of fall out and you won't know what order they went in. I know the order because I've done a bunch, but you can do this more carefully on yours. So things start falling into your hand. You have the air filter housing, has a gasket on the back and a tube for the breather. Then you have a metal plate and a gasket. You can normally determine the way these things go if you're real careful about changing the orientation and seeing where the gasket markings are, things like that. Then you have this little plate spacer over here along with a gasket. Again, if it's never been disassembled and you're sure it's assembled correctly, you can see where the impressions are on the gasket to kind of figure out where things go. This big piece here normally blocks the heat from the exhaust, things like that. And then you can begin to disassemble. You want to turn off this valve so that extra fuel doesn't flow. In this case, it has this little winged clamp. Sometimes you can do that with your fingers. Instead of just pulling on the fuel line, try twisting it back and forth till it breaks free. If you just pull, it kind of acts like like a Chinese finger trap, the toy you may have played with as a kid. If you're not sure if the gas in it is good, now would be a good time to drain it. Just get a water bottle or a disposable water bottle or something and turn this valve on. The way these things work over here, you have the throttle and you have basically two holes. You have a little tiny hole for this spring, and then you have a larger hole. And basically these L shape or S shape things, you basically just turn and pull. So it's pretty easy in that regard. And again, he already had this off and disassembled it. So some of the things we're going to look for is to see if he made any mistakes and put something in backward or left something out. So we'll take a look at that now. All right, so here's the carb. Yeah, start by taking off the bowl with 10 mil, and you're going to lose all the fuel. I could have done that somewhere else. Sometimes when you're filming, you're not necessarily thinking that straight. So yeah, drain that into a different location besides your workbench probably. And okay, so I think maybe he didn't realize that all this needs to be cleaned out. This is all basically debris. And this is also a type of corrosion. So this tells me there was water in here. And all this debris here on this housing will cause some trouble because even if it, okay, yeah, and this shaft is basically seized, which can cause some leakage if this thing can't pivot properly. So we'll pull him out. Yeah, so you can see little bits of buildup on here that need to be scraped off. You can even see here basically right there, some buildup. And then, yeah, inside there. Yeah, so there's quite a lot here, even before we're in to the jet area. So like all of that is going to be problematic. That's going to get into the main jets. And then a lot of times you have to modify a slotted screwdriver to fit down in this slot because they have basically like a shape. Basically here is often too thick. And this thing can take a little while to kind of come out. It's already loose, but it's just kind of jammed in there. So normally a lot of tapping will do the trick. You can try and get in there with some pliers, but it's kind of close quarters, so not much works too well. Just take some time and gravity. And it's brass, so most of the time, oh, so it's not magnetic. Yeah, most of the time when you kind of get in there like that and move it around, you just end up pushing it deeper. But it's close now. You can also tap on the side of it. And this one's kind of a pain. Grab something like tweezers would work. Let's see what I have. I'm doing a lot of electronic work recently with circuit boards, so a lot of my tweezers are in the house. So I just have some cheap plastic ones. As you try and pull it out, kind of give the whole thing a twist. Just busted those off. I could just go inside and get them, but I'm already filthy and full of gasoline. You can also put something in and expand, like snap ring plier type thing. And if you're wondering why I didn't edit this out, it's not about laziness. It's about these videos. I mean, I've fixed about 500 or 600 small engines, and the people who have fixed that many engines are not watching this video. Chances are the person watching this is someone who's trying to do it maybe for the first time. And so if I edit out all my mistakes, it may leave you feeling like you don't know what you're doing or you shouldn't be doing this. And if I leave some of them in, you might be encouraged, like, oh, okay, well, I had that trouble too. Now, there's an emulsification tube in there that you need to get out. And there's a couple ways to do that. The best way is you can remove this. You know what? I'll just do it since I'm trying to show how to do it. So this plate can come out. You want to take a really good orientation of the way this whole thing is set up. Take a picture. Turn it this way and grab it with some pliers that aren't going to mar the surface, like these Knipex wrench pliers, and you pull like so. And once you pull that little plate out, you can pull this rod up. Once you do that, you can get really good access to this brass tube in there. And what you want to do is you want to pry and push it down. Now you want to be careful that you don't destroy this housing. So something made out of plastic would be ideal. Something made out of wood would also work. I'm going to go ahead and grab the sort of thing that I normally use, which is an automotive trim tool, sometimes called a bone. And you can just put that in there and pry like so. And it'll pop. And then it'll come out the bottom. And it only goes in one way. It goes up like that. If you tried to do it any other way, you'd find that it didn't work. The last thing you need to do is remove this. Underneath here is a very small jet. It's an idle jet that needs to be cleaned. Now you're going to remove this and nothing's going to come out. But if you look in there with a flashlight, you'll see some stuff going on in there. Let me see if I can show you. you'll be able to see it. You may not. It might also be plugged, which they often are. Oh, there you can see a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to get that unplugged first, and then I'll show you. So this thing is pretty heavily corroded. It really would not be a bad idea to just go ahead and replace this. And I do have one from another machine that I could replace it with. I think it's identical. This one's by Kian. This one is also by Kian. Kian is a really good Japanese manufacturer of all kinds of things. We used them at Volkswagen, so they're really good. You also want to check to see if these things are the same. If not, you can have some trouble. So I'm going to do a little comparing here in detail, see if these are transferable. If not, we'll rebuild this one. All right, we're going to go ahead and rebuild this thing. Or, well, it's not really rebuilding. It's really cleaning and disassembling. So a couple tools you might want to have is kind of the standard brass brush. These type brushes are also nice. You can clip them so they're a little stiffer. They're good for cleaning. This is a really nice type of brush. This can go in a drill or just be used by hand. It's stainless steel and it's more of like a less like a toothbrush, more like a paintbrush. These are very useful. Blow torch tip cleaners, files, excuse me. These can be very useful, although these are still too big for some applications. A lot of times when you buy this, you'll get some of these. But actually, one of the best tools that you may already have sitting around is one of these. This is one of those little basically flexible keychains that you can buy. And these have really thin, high quality stainless steel strands inside. And I actually just left mine in Puerto Rico. I was there last week on a missions trip. So I'm going to make a new one and I'll show you what I do. So basically, you just clip one end and you need to expose some of the fibers like so, maybe a bit more. Just cut this. You can also burn this off if you wanted. And then you just untwist this guy a little bit. And as you untwist, you'll start to get some individual collections here, and then you can just keep doing that until you get a single strand. And a single strand from here is thin enough, at least in all the ones I've made. I've made several of these. It's thin enough to reach into the tiniest little holes. There are holes in a carburetor, especially a two-stroke carburetor, where all of these that you get on Amazon will be too big. You won't be able to clean them. And actually, this might not be enough of the insulation pulled back, so we'll pull back some more. Like that. And then again, just give the whole thing a twist. And you have almost, well, probably a lifetime's worth of strands here. Unless you lose this, like I do occasionally, you'll never need to replace it. And really, that's all you're after. Now, you can also pull a single strand out of here. Some guys, will do that. They'll just grab a single strand like this and pull it out. But that's kind of cumbersome to hold on to. This is just a really convenient form factor. So anyway, so what I'll do, you can just use, one of the best containers I came across was a bowl for dog food. And you can just start to clean with the wire brush all the areas that you can easily get access to get away that crud. You can probably see already the brown on this side and the clear on this side. And technically there's nothing wrong with that stuff sitting on this surface. It's not doing any harm. But what will happen is it will dissolve or break off into the new fresh fuel, and it will contaminate the new fuel with little tiny particles that can get jammed up in other parts of the carburetor. And that will then cause the problem to come back. And that's sometimes what happens when you have intermittent issues. So that's one thing that you need to do. You can do this by hand, or you can chuck this in a drill. You can get in here. Now you may choose to just replace this. Sometimes you can actually get a pretty good deal on these Honda carburetors for like 20 bucks. So you may just choose to do that. But if you don't have access to the parts, or if you want to up your skills and learn how to do this for when parts are more expensive, it's a great way to practice. So the best and the cheapest solvent is just gasoline, even the old gasoline from the machine. There's a phrase among chemists, like dissolves like. And so if you have a petroleum-based buildup, like in this case, then you need a petroleum solvent. And gasoline is a great one. It's also very cheap compared to lacquer thinner, which also works. Carb clean will help you get into areas you can't reach and help dissolve some of those solids. Don't use brake clean. It's too aggressive. And in my experience, it also doesn't even work as well. So you can clean around the throttle plate. I can't show you this, but this is a little bit stiff. It obviously moves, but normally these things are super flippy and floppy. And in this case, it's just a little bit stiff. So you can just kind of work that. Yeah, that's getting better. Yeah, and get all of that clean. So I'll do a little bit more of this off camera because I don't think anyone wants to watch me clean the whole thing. But yeah, basically you want to scrub away the golden bits, and you may want to let this soak for longer in gasoline. It kind of just depends on how crusty it is, but you want that to be really clean. Again, there's nothing wrong with something sitting here, but it'll fall off or dissolve and thicken up everything, and then you'll have a different problem. So yeah, just take some more gasoline, throw it in a dog food bowl or something like that. Now, again, there's no chunks in here, but these things will basically flake off. So you do something like this. You can also take big other ones of these and throw it in a drill press. That works really well. But this works just fine, just takes a little bit longer. So I'm going to do this, well, I guess I'll do it on camera. It might interest somebody. So let's clean this up on the drill press. All right, I have my camera hanging from the ceiling, so it's a funny angle. So over the years, I've collected different brushes like this from estate sales and also purchased some new on Amazon. They're all really useful for getting in tight places. In this case, I'm going to use a brass one that'll fit right in there like that. And since this throws out little pieces, I'm going to use safety glasses. So I'll throw that in here, tighten it up. So after just a few seconds, you can see you can probably see all the dust coming off of it. There is some harder stuff in there, so I'm going to switch to steel. It didn't come off with the brass too easily, but you can take your time if all you have is brass. Throw a little brass one in here just to get the bottom of the bowl. All right, well, it can never be too clean, but the question is, when will it be clean enough? I'm going to do a little bit more on this off camera, but you want to get it so that there's basically no more residue. Like pitting in the surface is actually fine. That's really not a big deal. You just don't want anything that's going to dissolve or chip off. All right, so I'm all done with that. It's hard to detect texture, of course, on camera, but basically this thing is all smooth. What you're seeing there is sort of permanent discoloration, but that'll be fine. And I have another bowl here that I can give him from kind of a donor carb. Anyway, so let's get through the rest of it. So the the float, you can just clean up gently with a wire brush. I have never seen one of these plastic ones have a leak in it. The older style brass ones, they can corrode and things like that. Just be careful with these little plastic tabs. that you don't snap something off. And it can be nice to let it soak, do some scrubbing, then let it soak again, because the soaking can kind of only reach the outer layers of junk. And as you scrub those away, then it starts to soften up the inner layers of junk. And again, the cleaner you get this, the better your chances will be that nothing's going to break off and make its way into the jets later on. None of the buildup on the parts really makes a difference until it dissolves or breaks off. So, okay. And then when I'm satisfied, I start putting the pieces to the side. All right. You need something, baby?
Can you give? Do you know where any other Nerf balls are?
No, I don't.
No, do you know where any safety glasses are?
You want some safety glasses? You can use some of mine.
We need to stop.
There you go.
We need stop losing glass.
We got a Nerf competition brewing here at the household.
And we need one more. Ben, can you have this? Yeah. You, Becca, you. I'll keep. Your big ball. You can give this here.
Okay. So yeah, this end here is rubber, so you want to be careful not to destroy that with your wire brass brush or anything like that. So let's see. All right, yeah, that's good too. All right, this guy normally doesn't need any cleaning.
I use this too.
Sure, buddy. Yeah, so the emulsification tube, you probably want to use a brass brush on this because this is brass. You don't want to change the geometry or the size of the holes or anything like that. So just give the whole outside a good scrubbing. And then this is where these come in handy. You want to be careful. These are files. And so you can actually inadvertently enlarge the holes. What I like to do is just put it on there and just spin it a couple times like that. That way you're spinning with, if you do, I'm going to move past the grooves. If you do that in this section here at the end with the grooves, then you can actually enlarge the holes. And as you enlarge the holes, you're going to change the way the carburetor runs. And it's just a good practice. And then you see here at the bottom, there's some little teeny tiny holes. Those are too small to actually get this through. So that's where this guy comes in. Make sure you get through there. Through there. If you have some copper wiring, like automotive wiring, you can also grab if it's stranded copper wire, you can also grab some of that, take a strand or two. Yeah, and then normally I'll just brush away any debris. I'll throw it back in there to soak for a little while. The main jet is often where you have trouble. This guy gets pretty corroded fast because he sits in an area where you have some air and some fuel, and so you get this oxidation effect. You also are going to struggle a little bit to clean in here, which you definitely want to do. And letting this thing soak for a long time, that's a helpful technique, depending on what kind of brushes you have lying around. I don't imagine that most people have as many brushes as I do for this. So if you're doing this for the first time, you may find a small deficit of brushes to do this adequately. So something like a stabbing motion can be enough to get through there. And so far, I haven't even cleaned the jet itself. But there's really no point in cleaning the jet if you leave a bunch of debris on either side of it. Now this one, you definitely want to make sure you don't file at all because this main jet is a fairly critical dimension. You can change the air-fuel ratio of the carb if you file this to be larger or if you drilled it to be larger. You can probably see now that's opened up. And you just want to take a really careful look, again, to make sure there's no debris specifically on this side because it'll break off and jam up the main jet again. But it's hard to capture on film, but that's looking really good now. Well, let's see, I'm satisfied with this as well. And then we'll do another round of cleaning on this. And then clean this plate up. This is not very consequential. Okay. I don't know how good or bad gasoline is for your hands. I try not to get my hands in it too much, but it's kind of inevitable. You may consider cleaning the whole outside of the car before you get started. In this case, he had already done a bit of cleaning out here, so it wasn't too bad. But you want to, of course, avoid contaminating your recently cleaned surfaces, specifically around this part here, which I'll show you how to clean here in a minute. Okay, I'm going to clean that a little bit more off camera, but I want to show you a couple things you can do. Take some carb spray, and you can spray through this hole. Make sure it comes out the other side. And then in this hole, you should see it come out of here, bubbling. What you're going to want to do is take a single strand and go down into that hole. This is called your idling jet. If this thing's plugged up, what you normally have is what's called a surging or a hunting idle, where basically at idle it goes like rrr, 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 rrr. Basically doesn't get enough fuel, so it runs lean and the RPM drops, but then enough fuel gets through that it runs properly and goes back up. And this can be a little tricky to find out, am I really through the hole? Because you can't just look on the other side. So you got to kind of check the depth of how far you're going down, and then make sure you go further down into that hole. Take some carb spray, spray in there. Although normally spray won't be enough. You got to physically get something in there. There we go. Now I can feel it. And basically what you're doing is you're breaking up some of the debris. And after you've done that, you need to be careful that you get that debris back out. And you can spray from both sides. You'll probably spray yourself in the eye like I have many times. So be careful. And you basically want this area in particular to be like surgically level clean. I mean, just absolutely perfectly clean. And then I'll normally throw the screw back on there right away before anything else finds its way into there. If you wanted to clean around this area, you remove that screw, this shaft comes out, but this is feeling perfectly fine now. Nice and floppy. And yeah, I'm going to do a little bit more cleaning off camera because it's kind of boring, and then we'll reassemble it. All right, we're ready for the reassembly. So there is a O-ring down in there. And I thought I'd just mention this carburetor was about as far gone as what I would normally recommend rebuilding. It becomes a little bit cost prohibitive. At some point, if you're paying someone labor, sorry, I'll do this on camera. So you want to put the float needle in place, and you want to drop the float in, and what you want is for that guy to go in that hole. So I'm going to try and do it without dropping it and also do it well. Trying to show you all what that looks like. It can be a little bit fiddly, but eventually you get it in there. And then you slide this float axle through, and it doesn't, basically the bowl itself is what keeps that thing from walking. And you just want to make sure that as you lift this, it moves that needle. Then you can drop your emulsification tube in this way with this, this part going down. You can push it down yourself to make sure it's in there, but the jet will also push it into place as you tighten down the jet. Just make sure that as you're tightening down the jet, the emulsification tube becomes visible in the center of the carb here. Otherwise, it could be getting jammed up on something. And you can see him starting to pop out there. And these are brass threads. Well, these are brass components in an aluminum housing, so just be careful you don't over tighten anything. Yeah, so then we'll pop after that, we'll pop the bowl back on. Just make sure this guy's there, kind of centered. Pop the bowl on. Take your bowl bolt, get him on there. You do have a little O-ring there as well, in case you didn't notice. And then we can reassemble this guy. I have this guy here as a reference. And like I said, this is something that's worth taking a picture of, I think, so that you make sure you get the movement correctly and that it moves the correct way. So you can basically screw this up by putting this black piece on the wrong side of this post so that it doesn't move correctly. So you have to get that just right. And then this little notch lines up with that little tube. You can push in like that. And you'll kind of know that it's working. If you can tell that something's not right, then now's the time to reverse it. And yeah, that's the carburetor. It's not really rebuilt, although we call it rebuilding the carburetor. It's really a disassemble, cleaning, and reassembly. And it's ready to go back on. Again, if you can get a carburetor like this for 20 bucks, which you sometimes can, pricing seems to vary, then, maybe all of this work isn't worth it to you. And that very well may be. And if I were running a small shop, I probably would have just charged the customer a new carburetor. But I do this out of my garage. And I like being able to turn around the machines and give them back to the customer the same day without waiting on parts and all of that. And I'll let the customer know that they need to run stabilizer in their fuel, and otherwise it's going to happen again. And that the carburetor was basically right at the limit of what I consider to be rebuildable without excessive amounts of time and effort and ultrasonic cleaning and stuff. But yeah, I've fixed worse ones than this. But again, at some point it becomes a bit cost prohibitive regarding my time. So this is probably about the limit. So let's get it back on the machine and I'll show you what that looks like. And I'm reassembling. The first thing you're going to want to do is get these linkages hooked up. And so you kind of go in from the side like this and then loop the little spring into the little hole. This is another area where you want to take care to make sure you understand which linkage goes where. And you can kind of check that. So basically the choke, when you pull it, goes off and on like that. So that's right. You could also hook it up to that one, then it wouldn't work correctly. So just keep an eye on all of that so you do it right. You can reattach the fuel line. And if you have calloused enough fingers, you might be able to do that by hand, that little spring clamp. If not, you can use these pliers. As I was reassembling this, something struck me as odd. So I looked back at the video. So this choke rod was in this hole, but I think that's because when the customer reassembled it, they made a small error. Because the way these work is when you pull this lever towards you, you turn the choke on, which means this flap is closed. And when you push it away from you, it's off. So I think so basically I replaced it how I found it, but I think it was in the wrong position. And I've done enough of these that I kind of had this intuitive feeling of like, well, wait a second, something seems wrong. So I just double checked it. But I'm leaving this footage in there because it could be a mistake that you might make. And so it may be useful for someone. And this thing has gotten a little bit stiff now, so do that. Okay. So now when it comes to reassembly, I'm just going to sort of pretend that, I had forgotten and I wasn't quite sure how this whole thing goes back together. And so what you want to do is you want to start, you can put the rods through here. And then again, you kind of start reverse engineering this as to like what comes next. So you can look at the pattern of the gasket and what it must have been pressing against and how that shape must have taken place, those sorts of things. And you do want to get these things right. Of course, it's best if you've taken a picture or a video so that you know what you're working with, but not everyone has done that. And so you might have to reverse engineer it. So you can see that this guy, this hole is going to press against this hole up here. And generally, you have rubber on metal. So you don't normally have like metal on metal. So that's also kind of a tip. So you can start to load these things like this. A lot of people, first timers, have trouble reassembling this thing because this black thing kind of blinds your view completely until you're all the way done. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And so then next what you have is you have this gasket here. And also, my daughter needed something really quick. So yeah, next you're going to do the gasket. and he's going to face down to keep a lot of the heat. Basically, this gasket protects the bowl from getting too hot from the exhaust, which can cause the fuel to start to basically boil and vaporize and get something called vapor lock. And then we're just going to experiment. I think it goes like that. Should be right. Oh, like this, excuse me. Like this. Yeah, so you can just kind of experiment with these things and you can get a feel based on where the holes are and the grooves are if you study them. It's a little more difficult if you're putting back together something that someone else has taken apart because there might be grooves and markings in the wrong places. And you can Google it. There's pictures and things like that. So just take your time when reassembling this. You do want to reconnect that breather tube that was on the back side. I don't know if you saw me do that. And you can turn your fuel on. Make sure you don't have any major fuel leaks coming out. Hopefully you did all of that right. It'll take the bowl a moment to fill up with fuel. So give it a few minutes. Well, probably not a few minutes, just a few seconds. And then you can reinstall your air filter. And it should be done. We'll take it outside and we'll see if everything works as expected. All right, when you go to start one of these things, I always like to turn on the garden hose and then purge the system. You're gonna see, look, so you can see that. There's a bunch of nasty, rusty water in there. So there's something called pump saver you can put in your pump throughout the winter to keep it from corroding. One nice little trick is if you pull this handle while you're trying to start the engine, it unloads the engine and it's much easier to start. So you pull the choke, make sure your fuel's on, switch on the ignition switch on position. Whoops, choke it. So when you take your hand off the sprayer, if it doesn't idle nicely, if it hunts or surges where it goes like, that's generally a sign that that idle jet did not get cleaned, the one that has the small brass insert underneath the silver Phillips screw. It's different on other carburetors, but it's always in the same location. So, all right, well, I hope this was helpful. I know this is a long format, and I assume the only people wanting to watch something this long are the people who are doing it themselves, so I tried to make it detailed and useful for you. If you didn't like it, I get it, no problem. Give this video a thumbs down and go check out Steve's Small Engine Saloon. I've learned a lot from him. He seems like very knowledgeable, pretty good teacher, and he has very entertaining videos. So I hope you like those if you didn't like this. Take care, folks.